Hey folks, this is Matt Rainwater, and today we're going to be doing an episode of Talk and Draw. And I was thinking about what to talk about because I think basically the next couple episodes, I want to talk about process a little bit and talk about my creation process for Trailer Park Warlock and how I think about what I'm doing when I do it, which is actually, it's a lot harder than you'd think because it's starting to become very intuitive process for me because I've done it so much. And so what I'm saying is it's going to be kind of difficult to explain, I think. We'll see. We'll find out, right? So anyway, today I wanted to talk with y'all about thumbnails. Last episode we talked about panels, talked about sort of like a lot of different topics around panels. And if y'all are interested in knowing my thoughts on that, go check out episode, I believe that's episode 5 of Talk and Draw. So for this episode, though, we're going to talk about thumbnails, and we're going to be talking about basically what, for me, is the first step, right, of the creation process. A lot of people, when they make comics, they write scripts. So they just start from like a text file and just start typing out page 1, panel 1, and then write a description of panel 1. So like, for instance, right, let's look at real quick. Let's look at this page that I thumbnailed. If this were a script, it would be page 1, panel 1, and then the description would be like Aris standing on the peak of a hill. Behind him walks Nate and Candace. And then you would have, I can't remember who's talking here. I think it's probably Nate. Nate says, "But Mr. Maurice, we can't." And then Maurice says, "Silence." So that would be what you would write out, and then you would continue on, right, in the script. So I did that for, I don't know. I did do that for a couple of comics for a while. And when I worked with Austin on Garage Raja, which was a previous work from like a decade ago now, we would work from that factory line sort of setup of Austin would write a very robust script. I would take the script, I would thumbnail the script out, and then I would start drawing pages from there and go from there. Um, since I'm just working with myself, I have found that it's much faster and I need all the speed I can get, right, to meet deadlines. It's much faster to just write, like, basically do the thumbnailing and the scripting at the exact same time. With the idea that a lot of the dialogue that I write in these thumbnails, a lot of this dialogue is sort of placeholder. I'm usually, when I'm writing the dialogue, when I'm drawing these thumbnails out, I am just thinking about the essence of what the characters are saying. I'm not thinking about, I'm not, like, when I'm not writing it out, I'm not like, okay, this is exactly what they're going to say. Sometimes, like, this is a great example, this thumbnail right here. And we'll compare in a second, but when I wrote this panel out, I knew just from how much text there is, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff being said right here. I was like, okay, most of this stuff is not, or not, maybe not most, but a lot of this stuff is not going to actually fit in this panel, or I'm going to have to adjust this panel in regards to the size of the characters to make more space, more headroom for the text. And so I thought about that when I was thumbnailing this page, right? Because it's like, well, okay, maybe I'm not going to be able to fit all this in this panel. So I'll make sure the next panel is one that's simpler, so it provides more space for dialogue that might be dialogue from the previous panel that wasn't able to fit in there. I'm just thinking about how to shift and move around dialogue and text as I'm writing. Where do I need to have panels where there's a little more flexibility, right, in terms of how much am I going to fit in, right, with the word balloons, And then I have thumbnails. I thumbnail pages where or not pages, panels where I'm thinking very explicitly about the imagery. The imagery is the more important part of the panel, and the dialogue becomes less important. So, like the next panel right after this one, where we have, Aris standing on the hill and he's holding his wand, and we see all the penguins right in the foreground, and they're starting to chant. This is very image important kind of panels. Not that this image isn't important in the panel prior, right, where we see the mountain. That becomes very important as we move along in the progress of the story. But I'm thinking about it as, okay, this isn't as important in regards to what is happening immediately. I'm putting this right here to establish for later, so that over time the audience sort of gets the idea that, okay, this mountain is important for some reason. We don't really know yet, but we'll find out in a moment. And so this is what I'm about to talk about is generally what we call pacing. Pacing is the idea of you can either rush moment to moment, right, or beat to beat is another way of putting it in the story. So like I could say, like, we want to have all the penguins chanting, right? It could just be this panel. And then we would take all this stuff out where we see a close up of the penguins chanting, we see Candace and Nate watching them chant. We could take all that out and just have, okay, Aris right here, right? And then we cut to Aris beginning to, what would you say? Invoke a spell. The problem with that is it doesn't give a lot of room for the audience to take in what's happening and for the momentum to build. And so that to me is what pacing is about, is if you pull out, right, look at the whole page, you want to build that momentum of what's about to take place so that you can proceed to the next set of what's going on, because then we go to the next page, and this is something I'll talk about in a second, but we go to the next page with my very scribbly thumbnails. A bunch of different things are happening because this is describing an entire process that's taking place. So let's go real quick to the finished pages, right? So we saw the thumbnails. And something that, for me, as I started to go into the process of actually completing the pages, something else I'm thinking about when I'm thumbnailing is opportunities to save time for myself. So, panel 1 and panel 4 right here, these are panels where I actually copied panel 1, put it over to panel 4, and then redrew like Nate and Candace and did a little bit of redrawing for Aris. It saved me time in the long run because I didn't have to redraw all of Aris. I just had to redraw him turning his head. And I didn't have to redraw the environment. Not that there's that much to draw, right? Fairly simple. Fairly simple to draw. So anyway, that's another thing that I'm thinking about when I'm thumbnailing, is like, where are there opportunities for myself to save some time in the creation process so that I can better meet my deadlines. And then also you can see here, like, there are changes between the thumbnails and the finished page. I ultimately opted for a different perspective for Aris when he starts to, inspire the penguins to chanting. Because if we go back to the original thumbnail, and I'm realizing now that we're supposed to be seeing Aris from the back, right? Because that's how we end up doing here. It's just from a totally different angle. Basically 180 degrees in the other direction. So we look at this thumbnail, and we see the penguin from the back, looking at Aris from the back, and Aris is, holding the wand, inspiring them to start chanting. And this, what I opted for doing is having somebody being able to see their face, which I think is better overall as a way of bringing somebody into the panel, getting them interested in what's going on. It's a less emotional. I like this composition better overall, but it ultimately becomes a little flatter because we don't have we don't have like a direct emotion to guide ourselves into. Not that Aris is particularly emotive. Um, so, and then I also, something you'll notice in the next panel is that I pulled out the shot a little bit, whereas the original shot was more close up. I wanted to show more of the penguins. I wanted to give more of sort of an idea of the immensity of the moment. So I want to do one more comparison here. Let's see. Yeah, this shot's a little bit different, right? This shot that I'm looking at right here with Aris beginning to or invoke the spell. I think there's just more stuff going on. So going back to the thumbnails, one more thing I want to talk about in regards to thumbnails, and after that we'll go to just comparing the thumbnails to the other page that we were looking at. Thumbnails don't need to be particularly precise. They don't need to be well rendered. You're really just taking notes. And something that I like about thumbnails on a conceptual level is that it's basically writing. It's shorthand for what is going to be a finished drawn comic panel. So something that I think as a good tip for those of y'all who are making comics and figuring out how to write comics in a more proficient way, I think it helps a lot if you can create scribbly shorthands for your characters so that you can start composing your panels and start composing that in regards to dialogue, because a particular aspect of comics in general is that you have to, like, the dialogue is part of the composition. The dialogue is part of the picture that you're drawing, so you have to draw your panels with dialogue in mind. And you can't just you can't just clutter and fill your panels in, at least not all the time, with characters and environments and whatever particular details you want, because ultimately a lot of those details are going to be covered up with what your characters are saying. So it's incredibly important to me when I'm writing a story to write it in a holistic sense, and that's why I do thumbnailing as opposed to scripts. I have had a lot of experience with working with scripts, and particularly this is in situations where the writer is separate from the artist, where the writer will not at all think about like how all that dialogue and all that information is actually going to fit into the panel, and then leaves it on me as the artist to figure it out. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, just not a. It's not. It's not an efficient process, to say the least. That doesn't mean that there aren't good writer-artist teams out there. There are, and there are writers and artists who, when they click together, it's amazing. But sometimes there are, and also, like, if you're an artist, like, you over time learn how to communicate with the writer you're working with and help them figure that out. But my point is if you're the sole artist, if you're the sole creator working on the project, you have the opportunity that has not often existed in comics, where you get to make all those decisions, and you get to make those decisions as streamlined as possible, because you're no longer having to deal with the interpersonal conflicts that can happen, where you have an editor and a writer, and there's drama, and there's conflict, and there's back and forth, and there's tension, or whatever, holding the project from like getting done. Um, says a lot about me, I guess. Um, but the point is like, if you're in that position, take full advantage of it. And one of the major advantages is you have the ability to write the whole project at once, as opposed to doing that whole, like, adding an additional aspect of it. Which I will also say, one last thing before we move on to this next part, is that, I mean, I actually do scripting at the end. I will script out the dialogue after I've drawn the panels. After I've drawn and colored the panels, I'll do basically what is a redraft of the dialogue based on the dialogue that I've written down in the thumbnails. So what I'll go over when I get to that step, what I call the lettering step, this is right before I start actually doing all the lettering on the page, is I will take my thumbnails, compare them to the finished, like, drawn colored page, and then I will redraft all the dialogue out, and then copy paste that redrafted dialogue into the actual finished page when I start lettering. So for me, that's a process that works great for me. For others, that might seem really weird and odd. I know artists who, one particular artist, Steve Lieber, would actually, like, he would do the, I think if I can remember correctly, he would often do all the lettering himself on the projects that he did. And he would do, if I remember correctly, this has been years ago, he would do rough pencils and then put in the lettering and then ink. And then basically what would happen is he would have a finished line art page, and then a colorist would come in and then color it, because he didn't do the coloring himself. So basically, like, his process was, I'm going to do all of the line art, including the lettering. So if you can imagine all the black and white content, which would include the, the word balloons. And I think he also did the sound effects, if I remember correctly. I cannot remember very well. It's been a while. But I think he also did the sound effects. So he basically had full control of the composition on the page, and then let a colorist take care of all that stuff, because he didn't want to do the coloring part. I find that interesting, because everybody has a different process by which they can make a page, right? And for Steve, that was also a process that was in a different sort of area of comics, where it was print, right? Print industry has kind of a different set of obligations, and a different set of, there's not as much flexibility. I think that's where I'm going for, in terms of deadlines and in terms of time frames. And there's not as much flexibility in terms of how you can fix your mistakes, because once something's printed, once you've put everything on the plates for printing, that's it. It's a very expensive process to then have to reprint a page. Whereas doing it digitally, you have all of the, like, you can do whatever you want. I know that I've altered mistakes or fixed mistakes after publishing with Webtoon. Just because I could, and why not? If you have, like, a misspelling, if you have a typo, whatever, take advantage of that technology or that opportunity to fix that. So anyway, we'll go over comparing the thumbnails one more time, and then I'll let y'all go. So we're gonna go over the thumbnails for this page real quick and just make a brief comparison as to, like, how it ended up. So Actually, there's a part of me that likes the composition for this. Oops. This thumbnail versus the finished. I think what I ended up going a little bit. Actually, ended up going in a little too tight. Like the shot's a little too close up compared to this one. Not that it's very obvious, I think. Another thing that happened is the angle changed for this mountain. I'm just looking. I think another thing that I'm kind of feeling while comparing the thumbnails to the finish is something that's kind of going on for me is the thumbnails sort of on some level look a little more epic than the finished. Not necessarily every shot. Like I love the way this shot turned out with Aris zapping the mountain. I just think that I didn't quite. I don't know. Something happened where I did not quite meet my own expectations for how this mountain was gonna look. And yeah, so basically when I was thumbnailing this part out, where we have all this like, magic, ancient magic stuff going on. I basically just sort of like drew out things where I was like, okay, ancient magic stuff happens. I haven't thought about any of like the important symbolism stuff, which is what I ended up incorporating into these finished shots. And one more compare. Okay, so I did way more particle stuff in this original thumbnail composition. And what I ended up opting for was making the composition work a little bit more for like the webtoon format. So everything's more vertical, whereas in this thumbnail it's more horizontal. Once again, I kind of like the way that looks. And sort of confused why I didn't do anything with that. And then, whereas in this shot, right, we pull out and we kind of see more of Aris's pose. I pulled in, did more of a close-up. And then a big okay, so here's another big change, because in this panel this is a very pulled out shot. We're supposed to see Aris on the hill in front of the mountain, and what ended up happening, we don't see Aris. We pull closer into the mountain. Probably because I didn't want to draw Aris. That's probably why that happened like that. And then for this last shot, it was going to be, originally the intention was a close-up of the penguin. What I opted for was actually showing all the Vimanas coming in, or being signaled, right? So I think that's it. I think that's all I got to say in regards to thumbnailing. I hope going over this process was helpful for y'all. It's fun to talk about. I love talking about craft and about process stuff. I'm kind of a process junkie in some ways. If y'all have any questions about my comics creating process, they can definitely go into future videos. I love to talk about this stuff. And if y'all don't care that much for process stuff and y'all have other things y'all would rather me talk about, please let me know. Leave a comment. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe, give it a like. Helps me out. And anyway, until next time, I hope you're having a good day. And bye.